Welcome to, hello, we're live. Welcome to our penultimate session of the day, how the food ag innovation ecosystem is mobilizing for solutions during COVID-19. I am here with Caesaré Assad, who is the CEO of FS6, a nonprofit accelerator that is working with food and agriculture entrepreneurs. So as you can imagine, she has a lot of insight, gets kind of a bird's eye view to see how a lot of different companies, specifically startups, are navigating these very uncertain waters of our COVID-19 reality right now. So I'd love if you could start off, Caesaré, just giving a little bit of background on FS6, FS6, for those who are not familiar.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Catherine, for having us here. Thank you for the program today. It's been really helpful just to hear from everyone, and I'll be able to kind of tie, I think, a lot of just thoughts onto what's happening. That's a lot of what we do at FS6. So as you mentioned, we are a nonprofit. What that means is we're really a steward here to provide resources and support to the kinds of entrepreneurial producers, farmers, food producers, technologists who haven't traditionally had, really access to the kinds of back-end services, legal support, mentors with extensive expertise who just want to lean in and help. Really what we do is we provide both kind of C-suite on-call support to, 1-2-person teams who are building and growing. And then we offer, a lot of, Harry and Melissa on our team are doing this right now, but right now, everything from helping our entrepreneurs stand up new websites, build e-commerce and distribution platforms, connect with the right types of resources that they need right now today, just to get to the next step in the process of their work. We also really use everything that we're learning to help provide insights to folks. So this is investors, corporate partners, philanthropists. Because of our vantage point and because we're working directly with people who are boots on the ground, a big part of our objective is just to simply help people understand where to really accurately put capital, resources, and other forms of support, so that we can move this food system to being one that serves people and the planet in a more holistic way.
Fantastic. Thank you. And everyone start putting your questions in, because Caesaré obviously has a lot of insight into a broad variety of companies out there that we haven't really talked about too much on this summit. So we've been focusing a lot on restaurants specifically and retail, but you guys at FS6 are doing a lot of work more upstream with producers like farmers, butchers, other producers making the food that we eat that goes to the restaurants and the grocery stores. So I would love if you could give us a little bit of an overview. Obviously, it varies dramatically, but how some broad overall trends that you've observed and how COVID-19 is affecting these more upstream producers and just what you've seen anecdotally from companies that you've been working with.
Yes, I would love to. And that's a lot of what we've been doing, just literally talking to people on the ground and sort of anecdotally, big picture. I will say that overall, from where I sit and where we sit, this is actually it's a very hopeful and optimistic situation in terms of the way that the kinds of humane scale, animal processors all the way to, companies that think and care about their employees are actually showing a lot of resilience through this challenging, difficult time. I've said this before, but, the needs that kind of food system change agents had before this and the needs that they have now aren't that materially different, and they've built their models to actually be able to withstand some of the bigger interruptions that we're seeing with the longer supply chains. And a lot of this is because, these companies have models that are more localized and they have the ability to quickly iterate what they're doing, which we've been hearing stories literally all day about, just the ingenuity and creativity of folks that work in food, that work in agriculture. These are get her done folks, and they're getting her done. And I would say that's broadly happening. And we need to expedite the allocation of capital, resources, ingenuity, and really community rebuilding in order to see these solutions make it through this, ride this wave and really make it through and be able to build even stronger companies on the other side.
That's very encouraging to hear. I feel like you hear a lot of bad news, just doom and gloom about COVID-19 and food. But when we spoke last week, you even mentioned that some of the companies that you're working with not only are surviving, but some are actually thriving and seeing a lot of growth during this time. But I'm wondering, like, say you're a local farmer and you don't necessarily have a ton of employees or a big supply chain set up. How are you seeing the companies you work with adapt to meet this growing demand on a local scale?
Yeah, I could talk about it all day. There's so much.
We have like 30 minutes, so go for it.
I'd love to just kind of give some specific examples of
yes
that are doing it. So, Tracy Harding at Cape Valley Farm Shop, it's a food hub aggregator, not far from where I live. I live in Sonoma County. They're over in Yolo County. She's basically operating this food hub, serving over 50 farmers. She's effectively become this new resource for almost every individual farmer. Farmers that weren't working with them are now coming to them. They're figuring out how to provide things like cold chain storage. They're linking buyers and to customers. Folks like Tracy and then Kitchen Table Advisors is a group also here in California who is really just rolling their sleeves up and working directly with primarily a lot of marginalized farmers to help really direct the flow of resources so that most of the small farmers we're talking about here are already under-resourced. This is unfortunately something we need to work on, producing nutritious and healthy food a viable and dignified wage-oriented industry. But these kinds of organizations are throwing a lot of, like I said, ingenuity, rolling their sleeves up, helping small farmers set up literally overnight online farmers markets. One of the technologists that we work with, that's an advisor to us, has down in Santa Cruz stood up overnight effectively a tool that he's signing up a new user every 3 minutes. And these are like literally just small farms, maybe 1 or 2 acres of folks that this is now after they've seen sort of a dip because of a loss of their, CSA and their direct farmers markets. They're now seeing an increase and an ability to kind of aggregate what they have so that there's more variety for the consumers. And really I think a really interesting and just, this is the kind of model that we need to see more of. Farm Generations Co-op, they have what is a farmer-owned software solution. And this is explicitly for individual small farmers to be able to have technologies that serve them and to be able to aggregate the data and the learnings from those technologies so that they can continue to be competitive. And this is simply the kind of asset that is really critical for communities to own, like communities of farmers. So there's a lot of, I would say, direct market online e-commerce tools developing. And there's a lot of opportunity to look at how do we make sure that the data, the insights and the learnings garnered from this continues to serve the farmers who we're trying to support with it in the first place.
Do you predict, and I know that's a dangerous word because it's hard to predict anything right now, but do you predict this increased demand that you've been seeing for these sort of local purveyors to continue? I mean, maybe drop off a little bit, but that inertia to continue after things sort of settle back down and maybe restaurants reopen their doors? Is that something that you foresee happening?
Yes. I think sometimes it takes a breakdown to have a breakthrough, and we're witnessing, I think that first and foremost, this is not short term. What we're experiencing now, we're all in the mix of trying to respond. This is going to be long term. What's going to happen on the other side of this, what it's going to look like, I don't think any of us can truly predict. But the one thing that we all have the opportunity to do is to reconnect with ourselves right now, to reconnect with in our communities, because that's where we are. And I believe that the more we can do that during this time that we have this natural separation from one another, and that the more people continue to do that, we'll continue to see the strength of community-based food systems grow, because now more than ever, people want to know where their food comes from. And we can see and sense that, and we know that food is just a great unifier. So all the things that food does, the comfort that it brings, the connection that it brings, the fact that it's an absolute critical necessity for us to be full humans. I feel like that is all what consumers have wanted. It's what has shifted over these last 10 years from being these upcoming trends to being transformational demands around transparency. And I can't see us moving away from this massive shift that we've had, where consumers now have at their fingertips access to where their food's coming from. I think the rapid behavior change that's happened because of this pandemic is going to further enable us to see stronger and more resilient community-based food systems.
Speaking of the transparency, have you observed any increased scrutiny for the farms or butchers that you guys have been working with over like food sanitation and safety? I know, as you said, people are more concerned than ever about where their food is coming from and how it got to their plate. Is that something that people are really diving more deeply into that you've seen? And is there a way that the companies you're working with are taking steps to sort of be more transparent about their supply chain?
Yes, I think, well, first and foremost, the companies that we choose to work with from the beginning already are transparent about their supply chain. That's one of our, it's one of the ways in which we look at the companies that we choose, because we're looking through this lens that's actually about the bigger system in the first place. And so for the companies we work with, it's a necessity. I think there are definitely a lot of challenges in terms of where we are with infrastructure to actually provide accurate transparency around different attributes that show up on packaging. There's a lack of USDA inspectors. For that matter, there's a lack of USDA plants that are available for producers to actually do humane scale slaughter in. So there are a lot of issues that are more, I would say, infrastructure that we need to solve for, that can be solved for with some additional investments. And there are, I would say, there's something else I wanted to add. Let me stop while I try to think of the second part.
No worries, just marinate on that. And we'll go to an audience question. Tiffany says, have you seen increased interest in automation or robotics at the ag level due to the potential labor disruptions due to COVID-19? And if you could maybe talk a little bit about the labor disruptions just for people who aren't aware.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. So, labor disruptions are huge and will continue. I think the labor disruptions on the industrial scale are going to just continue to be a challenge, because we're talking about just people crowded in a space. It's just the scale by which we're moving this food, we're processing and manufacturing it. I think across all parts of, from the industrial size to smaller regionalized food systems, there's absolutely room for automation. I think the key is that we actually define what the needs are of the people who are producing food in a resilient way, and we design technologies that meet those needs and that support building efficiencies that enable us to do more humane, more environmentally sustainable practices, and not to produce not necessarily at the expense of only producing more profit. I think that this is a massive opportunity where we can actually take all of this wonderful technology that's been developed, and we can retool a lot of the infrastructure that exists, and we can look at some of these current models that Food System 6 is supporting, this humane scale processing, and we can actually start to see where there's solutions that apply across the landscape. It's what we need to be doing. We're doing a lot of it behind the scenes right now. We're happy to literally talk to anybody about it. But it needs to be done. And I think, we need to move from cognitive dissonance around robotics and small scale agriculture and look at how can these new tools enable us to do better for our food system and for all of us that are on this planet together.
And speaking of reaching out, you should put your email in the message thread if you're comfortable doing that, or else people can look you up on LinkedIn if they want to learn more about FS6 or get involved in some way. Maybe you have some, strawberry picking robot friends that you want to connect with the FS6 team. And next up, we have a question from our own Michael Wolf, who says, how do you think the food tech innovation ecosystem will be impacted long-term? Relatedly, do you think early, like seed and angel level startups currently in the system will need to potentially pivot and recalibrate business plans due to COVID-19? So really tapping into your experience from the investment side.
I think that we've seen a particular, rise of interest in food and agriculture over the last, I would say it's really spiked in the last 5 years. And I think that's fantastic. I think that I personally think that there'll be more and more people are coming into seeing that there are so many opportunities in the food system. So I think there will continue to be innovation, though. To sort of the other question, I think that there's been a ton of new CPG products. That's been a market that's sort of exploded with options. And I think that there are ways that we can put our creativity to use to solve for real problems. And I think the entrepreneurs who are solving real problems are going to have to get really capable of communicating what they're solving for and communicating what their business can do. And I think that's all going to be what we need for seed investors and angel investors to start, I would say, aligning around. What do they want to see here? And how can organizations like FS6, how can accelerators, how can service and support organizations help to bridge this gap so that we can start to create an ecosystem that is really producing outcomes that we all know we need to see. Angel and seed investors are absolutely critical for this stage of the work to happen. And the more that they get clear on what they want, and we're happy to help with that. And then on the other side, the better that entrepreneurs get at communicating to that, building bridges, I think we'll see a lot of interesting things happen. And I think it's going to get harder for sure. So the good news is the more compelling solutions that are actually making a meaningful difference are the ones that will rise and be the ones that get resourced.
Is there anything in particular that you think you will be looking for new cohorts of companies to come into FS6 that maybe were nice to have before, but now is something that's like absolutely critical that a company has to have that you'll take more into account as you look to sort of build your accelerator cohorts going forward that maybe you weren't as concerned about before the COVID-19 pandemic?
I love that question because no, actually I feel, with the almost 30 companies in our portfolio, the 6 companies we're currently supporting in our current cohort, they are all so relevant right now. The work they're doing is critical, and we're seeing them all have demand that's, stacked, and they're all continuing to see opportunities where their business models are part of the solution. I do think, though, what we will focus more on is the circular and regenerative solutions across, from soil to packaging, which is it's very broad, but I think it's so critical to keep this systems level perspective. We will focus and continue focusing on humane scale animal agriculture and real food process infrastructure. These are big gaps across the U.S. food system that need to be retooled and reinvested in. And we will continue, I think, the piece that we want to put more focus on, because we've just seen the demand spike, is right size and open source technology for the food system. We need software and hardware solutions that can be deployed quickly and that can really have an exponential impact. These are really, I think of them as this mycelium part of bolstering the work that can happen and unlocking critical collaborations. So I would say that those are kind of 3 areas of focus for us. We've always put impact as our first criteria, and we think of that as really just resilience. So supporting companies who have a very, very explicit and specific focus on supporting the planet and people, that's what we have always done, and that's what we're going to continue doing, and just looking for how we can get to the next level of actually connecting these dots with IoT and other types of technologies that make sense for where we are.
Yeah, it sounds like that will become only more critical as we continue to wade our way through this uncertain time right now. So we have a question from Carol Kelly, who asks, do you see any conversations happening where food and ag innovation companies can work with large health organizations such as the CDC or the WHO?
Absolutely. And I think it's ever more critical that we recognize our food system and our healthcare system are absolutely inseparable from one another. Mm-hmm. I think that, this is back to the sort of way we've done things. We really have to have these bigger organizations are able to do certain types of things, and smaller agile organizations are able to do certain types of things. I believe that we now can see there is such a critical, there is an essential nature to both. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of, I think of it as like, we need to have better relationships with our elders, right? It's this, we need to have big, we need to have small, we need to have young, we need to have old. I believe that we will continue to see entrepreneurs developing and driving solutions, especially now, that are solely focused on interconnection and about really driving a care system forward.
Fantastic. And it looks like we got another audience question from Jeremy K. It says, hi, Caesaré. Are you seeing shifts in funding from traditional investors towards more innovation solutions in this moment? If so, how can small companies access these opportunities? Is there a running list or a process to apply that's similar to FS6?
Well, we have a partner, First Course Capital. I would say they are an early stage venture fund, and they really are pushing this model of how do we be a better partner to early stage innovators. Their general partners, which full disclosure are our FS6 co-founders. They volunteer their time to support our companies. They offer a Safe Note, which is a much more entrepreneur-friendly investment. They offer that for meeting eligibility milestone. So we make it basically milestone based in our program. I believe there are more traditional investors who are recognizing there's a need to create different types of capital. Mm-hmm. I think that we're not there yet, and I think that we need to get there. We have ourselves, we've peeled off a project that we're working on to develop a landscape analysis of who's actually putting money into these kinds of food system companies. I've talked to other both investors and other accelerator operators who are also trying to do the same. So, there definitely is an effort behind the scenes to try and democratize access to who are the investors who are actually putting money to work, and really trying to help save entrepreneurs time with navigating that complex, opaque system. So we need more of it. And especially anyone that wants to work on that particular project, we would really love to talk to you.
Amazing. There you go. And we have the Food System 6 website is posted in the comment channel. So check that out if you're interested. And we have a question from Elliot Smith, cool name, who asks, given how important institutional markets have been to help small and mid-sized farms and or processors grow, and since so many institutional markets are halted, if not in shambles, how is FS6 thinking about scale for these businesses in this new paradigm?
That's a great question. And actually, we work with quite a few companies that do serve the institutional markets. I think this is a really interesting space to watch. I've personally been working, with large scale food service operators for over a decade, and it's, especially in the Bay Area, it's like our tech community supports so many of the small farms here because they are a big purchaser. A lot of those companies have stuck to their commitments. Airbnb, LinkedIn, like some of these folks have just really said, we're not going to let they get it. I don't know how long they'll be able to do that, which is just basically granting the dollars forward. I think there are a lot of ways we're going to have to reimagine. And I think a lot of the market is going to shift to what everybody's talked about before, consumers at home who are cooking more. It's hard to say right now, but it's happening. The folks that have been traditionally selling into institutions are figuring out how to access the direct consumer market. And, this is going to be an ongoing exploration as we also continue to see work change. I think that's the piece we're still unclear about is when are we going to get back to work? What's it going to look like? And how are, our workplaces or our institutions going to behave differently? So it's going to be, I think that part's going to be some challenge. It's going to be some opportunities for us to all get some creative thinking going. So thanks, Elliot.
All right. We have a question from Scott Heimendinger, friend of the Spoon, that I think has been on a lot of our minds, mine specifically, who asks if there are specific changes that people can make in where, when, and how we spend our food dollars that can help the most vulnerable parts of the market recover right now, say small farmers, say restaurants, or if you have insight into who else could use those dollars and how we best spend them.
Absolutely. First of all, I think that if you have a way that you can talk to folks in your community and see what they're doing, I always think that's a great start because, you're connecting with your neighbors around food. You'll probably be surprised by what you find locally. I've been just totally impressed. So there's the word of mouth. That's kind of how our food economy has really worked pretty much until there's a big food economy that works by word of mouth. So I would check into that first. I would then also say, go to the FS6 portfolio website. Central Grazing Company out of Kansas is, they're shipping the most delicious lamb that I've ever had. Keller Crafted Meats up in Sacramento. They're aggregating from some of the most humane ranchers around Northern California. Rebel Meat Co., same thing. They're aggregating. They're actually, along with their a partner that they work with, Milk Run, they've hired on almost 30 new food service workers in the last 2 weeks. And really been able to redirect a lot of what was going into restaurants directly to consumers because they are a nimble and local solution. So I would encourage to start looking around and just talking to people. Honestly, it's one of those things that after a few conversations, you're likely to find a resource. The other thing is there's a couple of really cool, there's From Seed to Spoon, which is an app that helps you plant your own garden. It also has recipes. It also has nutritional tips. This is, developed by this couple out of Oklahoma City. And then there are also a lot of different types of tools available for either community planned gardens. There's a lot happening within the Native communities that I think we can learn from in terms of different food sovereignty projects. There is a massive effort to replant native gardens. So we really need to be thinking about our own personal food security, our own personal food environments, what's happening directly in our communities. And from there, we can start to kind of go out and look at, if I move to this region, what are the things that I can get from this region? And how do I start to myself map out what my own personal regional food environment might look like? That activity in and of itself is this fun, creative, imagining process that helps us all together start to identify the resources that make sense for us to personally support.
Yeah, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of raised bed gardens happening this year, which is really exciting, in my backyard included. So thank you, Scott. And I have a final question for you, Caesaré. We're reaching the end of the session. And I know you mentioned at the beginning, FS6 both advises startups on how to make more sustainable food system, but you also aggregate insights to help people who want to invest in these sort of next generation food ventures. And obviously the entire food system is going to be at least slightly shifted after COVID-19. I'd love to get your insight into which areas you think will maybe be the most progressive or the most viable for investment after the panic dies down. Like where will be kind of the cool new areas that you think that investors will be flocking towards or paying more attention to that maybe they weren't beforehand?
That's a great question. I think investors are already looking at direct to consumer, delivery services. I think we've already, plant-based, like all these things. I think there's actually an opportunity to look at where's the infrastructure opportunities here? There's so much CapEx opportunity. And I think there are a lot of ways to think about investing in models that help to retool and rebuild a lot of the process manufacture infrastructure across all aspects of the food system. And this includes corporate partners. The opportunity to retool and reinvest in our manufacturing and process infrastructure is one that creates an exponential kind of impact and return. And so we're going to be doing more work on this, digging into it more. But this is, I know it's actually not very sexy at all. It's kind of exactly not that, but it's actually transformational investment. And I think that, that's really where we want to lead investors to is, hey, let's make investing in humane scale slaughterhouse facility something that's really sexy and exciting. And that's the kind of thing that we need to do. So thank you.
There we go. We need to make these things more sexy and exciting. I think that's a great note to go out on. Thank you so much, Caesaré. Really appreciate it. As I said, foodsystem6.org if you want to check out what they're working on. And we will be back in a couple minutes with the final session of the day from Mr. Mike Wolf. So thank you so much.